afternoon, everybody. Welcome to In the Zone with Rich Sutter. This is our second week. Very, very excited to be back with you. I have my ride or die partner, Pete Coles, with me today. And we've also offered him up a nickname, which is going to be MV Pete, because Pete does everything around here. I just walk in, sit down, everything's cooked, dinner's ready, and all I got to do is sit down and eat. So I wanted to thank Pete for that. He does an amazing job. And today he's going to be on with me as we go through a couple of different segments on the show.
I'm ready for my opening lecture here.
So I didn't sleep at all this week, Pete. This is the week that I love the most in college basketball. We're in the hoop group. We're in the hoop loop. And right now, all we're doing is turning on ESPN and the various affiliates and just watching all basketball right now. It's been amazing. And I really, really enjoy this time of year. So you have your conference tournaments that have just ended, and you and I are going to talk about a little bit about the bracket. We have the bracket out, and we're going to walk through it. Games officially start today. And we're going to talk a little bit about those play-in games. I'm not in love with the play-in games, but we'll talk a little bit about them as well because some of those have concluded. But I was really excited to do the show last week. We're really excited to be here again with you, and we just want to get into our Feed 'em Fish section right away. So before we get into Feed 'em Fish again, I just wanted to explain it just a little bit before we get too much into it. Okay, I was a young coach, young basketball player in the Bronx in New York, and I was able to run into a gentleman by the name of Sam Tolkoff. And Sam Tolkoff was a legendary coach at Monroe High School in the Bronx. And if you want to visualize Sam Tolkoff, he's about the closest thing you could get to George Burns in a coaching outfit. He was a very, very small man, but he carried a big message and a really interesting message that he had. And it was all about belief in yourself. It was all about, as an athlete, how much you really needed to believe in yourself. So when we start off with Feed 'em Fish, we wanted to give Coach Tolkoff a little mention. He was an amazing coach back in the Bronx. I have no idea what the saying means. I have no idea what Feed 'em Fish means, but it just sounded so cool. It fit right in with basketball, and that's where we're going to start off our first segment today. So we actually had a little bit of time to review last week. I sat with Pete afterwards, and I said to Pete, how did we do? What did you think? And he said, you were all over the place. And I said to him, that's one of the nicest things anybody's ever said to me. Wait till next week. And so now we're going to start off in the Feed 'em Fish section. We just went through a little bit of explanation about the great Sam Tolkoff, what a great speaker he was, what a great legendary coach he was in the Bronx. But now we want to slip in right into Feed 'em Fish. And unfortunately, I have great respect for this organization, but they got to come on the board today, and we're really going to give them some business because North Carolina has decided not to play in the National Invitation Tournament. They were not included in the field of 68 for the NCAA tournament, and they decided not to go into the tournament. So I don't know how this all played out down in North Carolina, but I think it's a little bit of a blight on the program. It's terrible image-wise, and I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. I really think North Carolina made a huge mistake here. Their coach is Hubert Davis. Their athletic director is Bubba Cunningham. I assume they went into a room, and they went hubba, came out of the room and said, we're not going to go to the NIT.
Is this the first time that's ever happened?
There's been other instances of it, but I think that this is the most high profile and certainly the most egregious. And the NIT is a situation that's a sub-tournament of the NCAA, and teams love to go to the NIT because it's very prestigious now. It's difficult to get into the field of 68. It's very difficult now with all the automatic qualifiers and then the really rigorous at-large selection. North Carolina didn't make it through there. And I think as a coach and as a basketball lover, I think, wow, you get to get your team back out on the floor for 2, 3, 4 more games and have a chance to win a title in the NIT, which I think is significant. Growing up as a young man in Madison Square Garden, I thought that was an unbelievable tournament and had great tradition and history.
UMass did a lot of damage in the NIT over the years.
UMass has had great runs there, and now they've moved the tournament out of Madison Square Garden. They've moved it to Las Vegas, I believe, so that's a little bit of a change. But I think it's still a very strong tournament, and I think North Carolina really made a bad mistake not showing up for this tournament. I understand it's disappointing not to get included, and they have had a high level of standard in their program for many, many years. I understand all that, but you show up and play. You get your team ready, you get out on the floor, and you show up and play. I think one of the most vaunted programs in NCAA history just made a huge mistake, and I think that that's going to be a stain on their reputation for some time right now.
That's like a team refusing to go to a bowl game in college football. It's the same thing.
It's very, very similar. And it just left a bad taste in my mouth. I wanted to start off with that.
Yeah.
But I want to really focus on some of the positives that are in the NCAA bracket today. But before we jump into all of that, I wanted to have a quick conversation about Cinderella. Cinderella is what makes the NCAA tournament exciting. Cinderella is a term used for a team that might not be one of the bigs. It's a David and Goliath kind of an analogy, where the bigs usually do well in the NCAA tournament, but then every once in a while you have a Cinderella team. George Mason making the Final Four. St. Peter's just recently with Shaw Holloway making a great run.
Before Gonzaga was Gonzaga.
Before Gonzaga was Gonzaga, and that's how Gonzaga became Gonzaga.
Yep.
And so I think it's really, really a great time of year. You do your bracket, but I also wanted to talk about the Cinderella aspect of it because, honestly, I think that Cinderella's in trouble, folks. I think that Cinderella has been absconded with, sent back to the dungeon, and I think that the 4 mice that used to protect her have all taken deals as conference commissioners, and right now Cinderella is on the absolute ropes. Let me explain what I mean by that. You have power conferences that have great conferences, and they're rigorous conferences to play in all year long. And so let's take UMass Lowell, for example. They were 26-7, lost to Vermont in the end game for theirs to qualify and go to the tournament. They lost the game, but they were 26-7. Now, the theory is if UMass Lowell plays in the ACC, they're not 26-7. They'd probably lose every single game. And so when you start to compare those things in terms of at-large selection, those things absolutely come into play. What conference you play in and the rigor of the schedule of that conference absolutely has some bearing. But I think we've gone to the point where, as I referred to them the other day, and I want to give credit to the author, Weapons of Math Destruction is an absolute great book to read. It's by Kathy O'Neill. And it's an absolute fabulous read. And what I mean by it is there's an old saying, and I'll try and clean it up here because I know we're on public television, but there's an old saying that says that there are lies, there are darned lies, and then there's statistics. And so the statistics that are thrown into this thing are strength of schedule, quad 1 wins, and all of these different weapons of math destruction that allow the selection committee to pick teams, to be honest with you, that really, really don't belong in the tournament. The problem that they had, and we alluded to this last week, is that the NIL arrangement with the Power 5 schools has basically wiped out the middle of college basketball. There is really no middle left, and that's why when you see Cinderella's been absconded with or Cinderella's been put back in the basement, what you say is, who would they have selected anyway? Because those teams have been decimated. And so that was part of the plan as well, was to wipe out the middle so that when we got to Selection Sunday, you can turn to the power conferences and take somebody with a 19-12 record and put them into the tournament, and they're in there because of the power and the strength of their conference solely. And so that's what we have in the bracket, and we wanted to talk about that a little bit today. But when you talk about Cinderella, we didn't have the graphic ready, but we have some graphics for you today. We didn't have this graphic ready, so I'll walk you through the scenario. I have a good friend of mine, Jim Engelhart, and he was the sports information director at St. Bonaventure when I was there. He is one of the finest people I've ever met in my life. He's a great Bona man, and he should be the actual spokesperson for Miller Lite, in my opinion. But that's another story for another time. He's married to a wonderful person named Jackie, and Jackie went with Jim. They left St. Bonaventure and they went to George Mason University. He became the sports information director at George Mason University. Jackie went with him. George Mason gets invited at an at-large bid to the tournament and goes as a Cinderella. And finally goes in and wins some games that were just unpredictable and really, really it lit up the tournament that year. It was just so exciting. And I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of people tune into the tournament. And it's one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about Cinderella today, because I think if you don't invite Cinderella to the dance, you don't have the same dance that you used to have. Prince Charming wasn't there this year. The Chariot wasn't there this year. You can look at the power conferences and see how they ate up and swallowed up some of those other conferences. And I don't think that's healthy. And so let's just get into Cinderella a little bit. We go back to Jim Engelhart. He gives his wife Jackie, as the team starts to progress through the tournament, he gives his wife Jackie a slipper. And the slipper is Cinderella's slipper. And there's pictures of Jackie in the newspaper, everywhere, of Cinderella making a run into the NCAA tournament, winding up in the Final Four, George Mason University Patriots. Now, Jim Larinaga is a good friend of mine from back home, but also one of my former players, Christian Caputo, was on that staff as well. So it was an exciting run for us as well back home here in Westfield, because Chris Caputo was on that staff and they were going to the Final Four, a place the school had never been before. A lot of times mid-majors had never been there. St. Bonaventure, my university, with Buffalo Bob Lanier, they went to the Final Four. And that was one of the most exciting times in all of college basketball history. And for me, it made St. Bonaventure this place that I had never, ever seen before in my life, a place that I wanted to go. And so I think that that has a value that's intrinsic as well. And so when I talk to the NCAA selection committee, I say to them, life has inherent penalty, life has inherent reward. When you do the right thing in life, you get the inherent reward. When you do the wrong thing in life, you receive the inherent penalty. And that's enough for me. You receive the inherent penalty of life. You got it wrong. You didn't get it right this time. And the reason that you got it wrong is because the money was there for you to get it wrong. And that makes it a little bit untasteful. It makes it a little bit difficult. And so what we're going to dive into right now is what happened to Cinderella. How did they take Cinderella out of the dance, if you will? And so when we talk about weapons of math destruction, we talk about strength of schedule. They talk about quad one wins, which are teams that are in the top 25 or top 50 in the country. So we're talking about quad one wins. We're talking about wins against teams in power conferences. And believe me, that matters. It adds up. But when you say quad one wins, then you would have made Kansas the number one overall. You would have made Kansas into the number one overall because they had the most quad one wins. And so I think that there's a little bit of discrepancy about some of the mathematics that they use as well. And that's what I really wanted to talk about today. In a minute, we're going to bring Pete back in, and we're going to actually go through the whole bracket. We're going to select it right here in front of everybody, and we're going to go through and do the best we can. With the
You're going to do a lot better than I am.
and with the caveat that I'm not very good at this. Okay, people say he has a lot of knowledge of basketball. He might be a basketball expert. Not when it comes to this. And so I think it's a disruptive kind of event, and so it's more of a journey and a ride than anything for me. But I did want to talk about Cinderella, Jackie Engelhart. They made the run. It really added something to the tournament. It really added some value to the tournament, and I think if that gets taken away, I think that's value that's taken away that's going to leave us in a deleterious spot as a tournament, as a game, as a NCAA. And so we just wanted to lead off with that today. We're gonna talk about a couple of people that we think have no business being in the NCAA tournament. They're there by virtue of weapons of math destruction. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. But right now, what I want to talk to you just briefly about in the weapons of math destruction is we have several teams here. And if Pete can load up some of the graphics, I think we have a graphic on the Baylor Bears. And what we wanted to do is talk about some of the ways that the conferences can accomplish what they've decided to do. So the Baylor Bears have 31 total games. 17 of those 31 games have been at home. 10 of them have been on the road. Let's just go through this a little bit even further. Texas, we have the Longhorns, Pete. We have their logo at 31 games, they are 18 at home, 10 away. Now you say, Rich, 18 and 10 doesn't add up to 31. What happened to the other 3 games? The other 3 games were in a rigorous environment in the Bahamas where they were taking on enemy fire for the day, 3 days, 4 days, where they went down there with their team, had a great time in the Bahamas, but that's where they picked up those neutral site games, neither home nor away, where everybody's playing in a neutral site. And so that what you'll see is also, I think we have Northwestern up there as well. They had a great run this year with Coach Collins. This is one of the reasons why. 31 games, 18 of them at home, 11 of them away. We go down the list. We have, if you look at Iona, who's matched up with UConn right now, they have 31 games, but they were 12-12. They were almost 500. And so as we talk about the tournament, we'll go into that a little bit. But I really, really think that that matters. And when you're allowed to buy games and stay home for the preponderance of the early season, I don't know how you build up a strength of schedule number. How can you have a strength of schedule number when everybody you've played is below you? And if some of the sources that I like to use, and I'll talk about that as well, but the one I really love is Jeff Sagarin. Jeff Sagarin will take the teams 1 through, there are 363 Division I teams. I believe it's 363. And he'll go 1 all the way through 363 with power rankings, with strengths of schedule. And we talked about some of that stuff having value as well, but there also has to be a human touch to it as well, and I think that that's where we're kind of missing the bracket here. But when you see some of these power conferences and the teams in their conferences, Fordham was one of the ones that had a really, really great year. They played 20 home games. Fordham had a great year in the mid-time, but they had 24 wins, and 20 of them they had 20 home games. So I think that that matters. And when you look at the NCAA tournament, especially with bye games thrown in there, some of those games where you never leave home are games that you purchase from another team. You offer them a $50,000 or $60,000 contract, and that eliminates the return game. So you go in and you play North Carolina down at North Carolina and most likely lose. They give you a check for $60,000. You get back on the bus, and they never come back to play you at your place. And so most of the arrangements that used to be established were home-and-home arrangements, where you would take an arrangement and say, we'll play you at your place and we'll play the next year at our place. And either way, you switch those out, and it makes for a really, really rigorous schedule. But when you have the ability to just stay home for months on end and not leave, not travel, not take on all the rigors that UMass and Iona and some of the mid-major schools are taking on, that makes a big difference. And so when we add up all of these mathematical equations of how they get to this, I think that we're looking at weapons of math destruction. And I think that has eliminated Cinderella. It's eliminated the mid-major. Now throw in the NIL deal that we talked about last week, because some of the stuff we talked about last week, I didn't realize that the selection committee was going to walk into the right hand that we set up for them, because they did exactly what we thought they were going to do. And you have, when you take the NIL out of it, all 5 starters from St. Bonaventure are at different schools right now, benefiting some of those schools who are in the tournament. And so I think once you've added that toxic cocktail in, once you've brought all of that to the mix, you've got a problem. And so when we say feed them fish, we're going to feed them fish here, and we're going to tell the truth. We're going to try and give you a story, because people said to me when they saw the show last week, they said, I had no idea. We had no idea that's how this stuff worked. And so now when you see and you turn on your television and you look at the coaches who are in the Power 5 conferences, and you look at all of the different machinations that go into making them successful, it's a little difficult to say that some of these other teams shouldn't get some serious looks for the NCAA tournament. That's what I think. I think that they've eliminated the mid-major a little bit. They've eliminated Cinderella. And if you can have a team like UMass Lowell, who goes with 26 wins, they have no shot at the NCAA tournament, they have no shot at the NIT tournament, what is the standard for that team? And that's what should be discussed.
And that's a Division I school, correct?
They're a Division I school. They
Wow.
lost to Vermont in the final of their tournament, and they had an unbelievable season. And so sit there and say,
they're in Yankee, right? Are they in the Yankee Conference?
I believe it's America East.
America East, okay.
And so you sit there and say, what would they have to do in order to get into the tournament? What would be the road for them to get into the NIT? And we're going to talk about the NIT a little bit as well, too. But if we could, just for right now, just focus on the fact that in the zone, we're talking about the things that matter most in the game of basketball right now. Okay, these are the things that we think matter the most. These are the issues that are confronting the game right now and either slowing the game down or providing an unbelievably deleterious environment where the success of the student athlete, the success of the game, the success of the schools associated with those programs is diminishing, and it's escalating in some ways and it's diminishing in others. And again, we're not here to be Pollyannic. We're not here to say we're going to tear the whole thing down, but there are some things that can be done. There are some changes that could be made, which makes this much more equitable, makes it much more fair, and that's what the NCAA is in charge of. They're in charge of equity and fairness, and right now, they have chosen to sit on their hands, and they've chosen to stay out of this. They started this with football a while back, and now it's going into basketball as well. And when we talk about the NIL deal, the real reason that I'm against the NIL, to be honest with you, is I'm in favor of putting money into the pockets of the student athletes. I'm 100% in favor of that. The real issue here is that the money doesn't come from the schools that go into the NIL deals. The money don't come from the TV packages that they accumulate. They get to keep that money. The NIL deals are usually externally driven by people who have excessive amounts of money, and they can afford to donate $1 million, $200,000, $400,000 to young men who are looking to come to that program. So when you talk about NIL, the money's not even coming out of the television or the contract money, which these young people generate. They're generating a large quantity of that money for the schools, and they should benefit from that. We talked a little bit about that this week, but they punted, they went to the NIL, and it's left the game in a really bad spot. So we got Pete in. We're going to be able to put the bracket up. We're going to be able to walk through it, and we're going to be able to show you in live time who we think is going to come out and be in the Final Four, who we think will be the eventual champion in the NCAA tournament. Again, we're going to throw in the caveat that I'm not very good at this, okay? So when you come back
you're
and
a lot better than I am.
when you come back and say, Rich, your bracket was absolutely blown to smithereens, it's happened before. And so I'm going about this with humility, and I'm going about this with the same aspiration that all of you have to get lucky. And so Pete and I are going to start off. We have some graphics for you. I've walked through with Pete a little bit what we're going to try and do, but right now we're going to go up right into the South Conference, and we're going to walk through game by game, and we're going to pick each game for you, and we're going to tell you a little bit about the game, a little bit about the team. And so right now we have Alabama, and the play-in game was Texas A&M Corpus Christi, so we're going to pick Alabama there. That's no big surprise. I think they're one of the best teams in the country. I think they're ultra-talented, and I think Coach Nate Oates is a really good coach, and he's done a great job with them. Okay, we move down to the next game, and we go to Maryland, West Virginia. I'm going to talk about this also, but this is in the no business category. Both of these teams have no business being in the NCAA tournament. I'm going to say that flat out right now, but I'm going to pick Maryland.
This is where you drop the hammer.
This is where it is. There's no business being in the NCAA tournament for either one
And
of those teams.
that's because they pay teams to come in and they're easy wins for them. That's why you're calling them no business teams.
That's right. They're looking at a 19-14 record at West Virginia. You're looking at them being at home for a preponderance of time, mostly home games. And you're looking at a situation where there's some other teams out there that possibly could have gotten, some leverage here. They're 19-14. They were 7-11 in their conference, and they finished 8th overall. That team has no business in the NCAA tournament other than the fact that they're in a Power 5 conference. Maryland, same way. I think Maryland had a little bit of a better year. Kevin Willard's a new coach. I think that they did a very good job. I think Maryland, let's go back a bunch of years, made a huge, huge mistake when they left the ACC. They're kind of floating around out there in the Big Ten right now for no reason at all. But we're going to pick Maryland, go there, and then move on to the next game, next bracket, which is a really good game. San Diego State and Charleston. Charleston really shoots the ball well. San Diego State defends and does a great job on the perimeter. Their perimeter defense is going to have to be really good against this Charleston team because they shoot the ball from everywhere. And they can spread the floor, and they have decent inside people too. So when they can spread the floor and go inside a little bit, I think they're pretty good. But I like San Diego State there. I'm going to take San Diego State.
And SD State was also at one time, I remember them being a Cinderella about 10 years ago.
Yeah, they had a great coach, Coach Fisher, who was at Michigan, led Michigan to the Final Four when they had the Fab Five, and they went to the Final Four. I was actually at that final game when Chris Webber called timeout, unfortunately. But they had a great run that year. And Coach Fisher was there, went off to San Diego State, which is a beautiful place to hang out, 68 degrees mean temperature all year round. And he was a great coach, really good defensive side of the ball, and just a good recruiter, and always had teams that fit his style.
All I remember about SD State was Jim Rome was as a graduate of that school, and he used to pimp them all the time when they came up, when they were starting their first couple of Cinderella tournament runs.
That's exactly right.
And
That's
now
exactly right.
And now it's just they're so good that they're almost a perennial favorite to at least make the tournament.
So now we're going to run into Virginia and Furman. A lot of people high on Furman. The Paladins. I think that Virginia is going to carry this game, though. I think that their conference schedule is very tough. I think they've done a good job. Tony Bennett's pack line defense is going to be the difference here, I think. And so let's just go with that.
I'm going to go with Furman as a spoiler.
Furman has been a spoiler for a lot of people. I don't think you're wrong there, Pete. I think you could pick them in that game, and Virginia goes home early. That means Virginia probably wins the national championship next year, though, because when they got bounced out by UMBC as the only 16 seed to beat a number 1 seed, They came back and won the national championship the next year. Tony Bennett's probably on my Mount Rushmore. We can maybe close the show with that. Like people were saying, who is actually on your Mount Rushmore then, right? And so we can maybe close that out.
All right.
But let's go to Creighton, NC State. I like Creighton there. Big East, McDermott does a great job, coaches the team well, and NC State, I thought had a very good year, but I watched them a little bit. They're very guard heavy. Tergavian Smith is a very good guard, but I think I'm going to go with Creighton there. They shoot the ball a little bit better.
All right.
Baylor USB, I like Baylor. I think Baylor is one of the teams that I would offer up to people as a team that could do very, very well in this tournament that people might not have their eye on. I think the NCAA tournament's a lot about guard play, and they got very, very good guard play. So Missouri.
So did they have a conference where they played a lot of games in conference? That's why the 22-10.
They've had a pretty rigorous schedule.
Okay.
But they have also, we're gonna talk about this segment later, and we're gonna talk about leave the cannolis, and that's a segment that we're gonna talk about because. Dick Vitale used to have a saying. He said, eat the cupcakes early, and the cupcakes are the easy teams. And that's what Dick Vitale was talking about when he was talking about cupcakes. And so these cupcake teams that they have on their schedule early on is what sets up their record for later on. We're going to call it leave the cannolis because some of these teams should have left some of those teams alone and played a better schedule. They might have got into the NCAA tournament and had a better run.
All right.
But we're at Missouri, Utah State. I'm going to take Missouri there. They have some really, really good players on that team, and they have a couple of guys that might be in the NBA draft. Arizona, Princeton out of the Ivy League. Arizona has a very, very good team, and that's one of the teams that might not be on everybody's radar, but it's on mine. So we're going to give Arizona a shot here as well.
And Princeton got the automatic bid right out of Ivy?
Princeton got the automatic bid. They beat Yale. Had a really, really good win against Yale. And Yale has a terrific coach in Coach Jones that maybe we'll talk about later in the coaching segment when we talk about all the coaching jobs that are open.
Okay.
That's one of the finest individuals in the lower level of basketball right now. I can't believe some higher level teams haven't snatched him up, but he does a great job, and he's a true gentleman. So that puts us through the South bracket. So if we can slide on down to the East, we're going to open up with Purdue and FDU. FDU is a really, really cool story here. They have Tobin Anderson is a Division II coach, moved up to Division I. And what happened was they played Merrimack for their conference final. But Merrimack was not eligible to go to the NCAA tournament because they recently moved up from Division II to Division I, and they had a 4-year wait period in order to do that. So they actually won the tournament and deserved to go to the NCAA, but could not go to the NCAA, which then left FDU to go in sort of by default. So then FDU gets a first-round game as a play-in game, and they win the play-in game. And so they did a great job on the play-in game, too. I think they won the game by almost 20 points. Tobin Anderson's a great young coach. We might talk about him later with some of the jobs that might pop, although it's a little early for him. But right now he's going to get matched up against Purdue, and I think Purdue will handle that one fairly easily.
I was going to say, do they make a play for this, or?
I don't think so. That could be a Cinderella story. but also the play-in games happen almost in the same week that you have to play right now. So you have a pretty quick turnaround on your game, which makes the legs tired, makes it a little bit more difficult. So you're going into a fresh Purdue team, but they're playing with house money right now. They're playing with house money, so let it roll. Shoot the ball well. They could give Purdue some problems, but I don't know how they stop Zach Edey, 7'4", 300 pounds inside, and some of the other players Purdue has very good. And Coach Painter has done a fabulous job with them this year. So I don't know that they can survive, but if Cinderella's going to get going, FDU might be her. I would say, because now we go to Memphis and Florida Atlantic. Memphis surprised me the other day because I was watching them in the conference final. They played Houston. Everybody had Houston number 1 in the country. Memphis absolutely manhandled Houston in that game. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer. Houston's best player hurt himself in the semifinals. He pulled his groin, did not play in the finals,
Okay.
and that was a bit of a letdown. But Memphis, Penny Hardaway and his crew, they dug in on defense. They played outstanding defense. That led to easy baskets on the offensive end, but they looked terrific. And that's another team I'm going to offer up to everybody that I think if they get into the tournament and get moving, they have great athleticism. They play when Penny Hardaway's teams start playing good, he makes them focus on the defensive side of the basketball. That's how they were in the NIT a couple of years ago. That's how they went to the NIT and won the NIT, I believe. But right now, that team looks the same to me, where they're hungry and they're playing great defense. So as everybody out there, I think they're going to take Florida Atlantic, and I'm going to give Memphis a shot there. Now we go to Duke Oral Roberts. Duke's the hottest team in the country right now. I think they got absolutely a terrible seed by the NCAA committee. There's no way they should be a 5 seed. They should be higher than that as ACC champions. And John Shire, I've been critical of the hiring of John Shire, but right now he's got that team pointed in the right direction. They're playing very good basketball, and they're a young team with Kyle Filipowski, Derek Lively. These are 2 freshmen that are going to be NBA draft picks, very high NBA draft picks at some day, but they are absolutely cooking with gasoline right now and playing good basketball. So I take Duke there over Oral Roberts, although Oral Roberts, many people are talking about them because they've had some great success recently. That program, as far as mid-major or Cinderella, that might be a place where you could look, but I think getting past Duke's going to be really, really difficult. Tennessee, Louisiana. The last 4 times Tennessee's been in the NCAA tournament, they've lost to lower-seeded teams. Excuse me. Tennessee has been in the NCAA tournament for the last 4 times. They've lost to lower-seeded teams than themselves. I really think Rick Barnes is a great coach. I watched their team during the year. They're very physical. They play good defense. They do struggle with shooting the ball sometimes from the outside, and I think that can be a problem, but I'm going to pick Tennessee here.
Do they psych themselves out in these games where they play down to a team instead of playing up to a team?
In their conference, there's not much of that choice because they have such a great conference, and every game, when you go into those conferences, you can see why it's difficult because every single game is difficult.
Right.
So if you play in the ACC, okay, and you're Wake Forest, so you're going to go to Duke, you're going to go to North Carolina, you're going to go to Virginia, all in the same week sometimes, and that's just daunting. Very, very difficult to keep your team together under those circumstances. Losing is bad for teams in terms of cohesion,
Sure.
in terms of being able to stay together.
Yep.
And so extended periods of losing are almost like PTSD for teams because they can get really, really down and they can get into themselves a little bit, and that's not healthy. But now we move on. We'll take Tennessee in that game, but then we move on to what I think is one of the marquee games of the first round, Kentucky against Providence. You have John Calipari against Ed Cooley. Ed Cooley's been rumored to be at the Georgetown, a favorite for the Georgetown job. And my people are telling me that John Calipari might be heading out to Texas. So there's a lot riding on that game, and you might see as soon as one of those 2 coaches is out of the game, you might see them packing up the moving van as well. But those are rumors. I think Ed Cooley stays at Providence personally. I don't think he takes the Georgetown job because I think Providence right now is a better job than the Georgetown job. A lot of people will disagree with that, but there's a number of different reasons for that. And then when you get to the other side of it, I think, when you're talking about some of these other coaches that, might might be available. I think Ed Cooley stays in Providence, and I think that there's a possibility that John Calipari moves, but he has an unbelievable recruiting class coming in next year. He has 3 of the top 10 players in the country coming into his program at Kentucky next year, so that might be reason to stick around. Who knows? I'm going to take Kentucky there, though. They've played well late in the season. I absolutely love Ed Cooley, but they've struggled. They've struggled later in the season. Let's move on down to Kansas State and Montana State. This is another team I'm going to offer up as a team that I think could make a run to the Final Four. Kansas State is terrific. They have athleticism. They have guard play that's terrific. And they have some great, great athletic play up front. I think that they can last, and I think that they're built with enough depth that they could get into the tournament and make something happen. So Kansas State, Memphis are some of the teams that I'm looking at that aren't highly ranked, but I think that they can get in there and do some damage.
What's the read on Montana State? Because I've been hearing rumbling about them for a while now.
Yeah, Montana State, it's interesting that they would have a good basketball program because there's not a good basketball player within 1,000 miles of Montana State. And so we played in the Montana tournament when I was at Colgate, and the coach there, we were talking with him, and he said the biggest challenge they had in those areas was to recruit. But if you've watched South Dakota State or some of these other places that are very, very remote, it's actually it's a place where you can get players to go, but there's no distractions.
Right.
You can really focus on basketball, and I think that's what you see sometimes in these places. So I don't know a whole lot about Montana State, but I don't think that they're going to hold the water against Kansas State because I think Kansas State's one of the 8 best teams in this tournament. Michigan State, USC. This is a tough one. Michigan State didn't have the same cannoli cupcake schedule that everybody else had, but they're also a team that I'm not sure they belong in this tournament. They're 19-12. I'm just ambivalent about that. I know they play in a really good conference. I know that they do a lot of out-of-conference games that are difficult, but I like USC in this game. I think USC's got a pretty good team, but that's a marquee matchup right there. USC against Michigan State in a first-round game is unbelievable. All right, so we're going to close out the bracket with Marquette and Vermont. Vermont has had some level of success over the years. That's absolutely incredible. Coach Becker has done an incredible job down there. I don't know why there's some of the higher level teams don't knock on his door and ask him to come in and interview and talk about their job, because he is an absolute gentleman, has held that standard of Vermont basketball. The Catamounts have been the pride of the America East for a number of years right now, and his record, his one-loss record in his career record is absolutely staggering. That being said, I'm taking Marquette because I don't think they're getting out of the first round. I think Marquette, with Shaka Smart, has done a very good job. He was the head coach at Texas. Things didn't go well at Texas. Marquette scooped him up, and now over at Marquette, he seems to have found himself a nice niche, and he's doing really, really well there. Okay, so that wraps up the East bracket for us, and now we're going to move over and enter into the Midwest, where we have the number 1 seed overall, Houston against Northern Kentucky. Really, really like Houston. I'm not sure of the level of that injury to their player, Sasser. But if they don't get him back, they could be in trouble. But I don't think they're going to be in trouble against Northern Kentucky. So we're going to take Houston there.
So they might have a trouble with a deep run if they don't get that star player back.
I think they struggle on the offensive side of the ball.
Okay.
In general, I think that's going to be a problem for them. Defense is great. They're fantastic on defense, but you got to be able to hit it on both sides of the basketball in the NCAA tournament. I think that's where they might struggle. Now we go to Iowa-Auburn. This is another marquee matchup in a first-round game. I like Iowa a lot, but matched up against Auburn, that's a really tough matchup. You're going to see a very skilled team with Iowa against a really athletic team with Auburn, and I think Auburn's play in their conference could have gotten them ready, but I like Iowa. I'm going to stick with them. I really, really like their team, so I'm going to stick with them. I've seen them a few times. They
Sounds like a mismatch then.
Shoot the ball very, very well.
A finesse versus a brute force team.
It's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. 2 great coaches also. You got Coach McCaffrey at Iowa, and you got Coach Pearl out at Auburn, 2 guys that have been around. So that's going to be a really interesting first-round game. Now we go to Miami, Florida against Duke. I thought Miami received a little bit of the harsh treatment from the NCAA committee that Duke did. I don't think they belong on the 5-hole. They lost in the semifinals of their tournament to Duke, but I think they're a really good team. I don't think they belong in the 5 seed, but Drake is really, really good too. Drake's really, really good team from the Midwest, and they have a lot of good energy about their team right now, but I'm going with Miami because I got Miami going pretty deep here. I think think Miami went to the Elite Eight last year, Final Eight last year, and they added Pack from Kansas State this year. I think Pack and Wong might be the best backcourt in the country. Some people disagree with me on that, but I think that they might be. And they have a lot of good players. The one thing I would concern myself with Miami is the injury to Ormir. Their big kid, Norshad Ormir, got hurt. I'm not sure the level of the injury or where that's at right now, but that would be big. That would be rough for them if that did happen to be an injury that lasted longer than the tournament. We go into Indiana and Kent State. I love this game right here because Indiana doesn't belong in the tournament. Kent State hasn't been in a tournament in a really, really long time. I love Trace Jackson Davis. I think he's had a great year. I think he's probably in my top 15 NBA draft picks. But right now, I think they were 19 and 12. I don't think they have any business being in the NCAA tournament. But I think they also got a pretty good matchup. And so I think that it's possible for them to advance over Kent State. The funny part about it is one of the games I got to scout when I was a young coach, I went out and we were playing Kent State the next day, so I had to go see Kent State play live, and that was when we did a lot of live scouting, and it was against Indiana and Bobby Knight, and it was an interesting, I was in Bloomington in Indiana in a sea of red, and it was an absolutely exciting environment to be in, and to be sitting that close to Bobby Knight was actually pretty cool, and I think Indiana handles Kent State this year, but I think Kent State's pretty good. I wouldn't sleep on them, but I'm going to go with Indiana. Keep moving here, and we're going to slide right down. We have Iowa State and Mississippi State. I like Iowa State in that game, and one of the reasons for that is they have Osun, transfer from St. Bonaventure, one of my guys. I love him, and I think they're going to be able to get going. I want to give a shout out to my guys, Joe Collins and Rich Lucky, two of my best friends from back home, Kennesaw State graduates. I know they're excited about Kennesaw State making the tournament for the first time ever, but they're not going to beat Xavier, fellows. I'm sorry. Xavier's a very good team, coached by Sean Miller, used to be at Arizona, and I think that they have a really good team. If they're healthy, again, they've had some injuries. If they're healthy, they could do some damage. They won the NIT last year, and they're a really good team.
Is Xavier an ACC team now?
Xavier's in the
Big
East.
Oh, Big East. Okay.
In the Big East.
I remember they were an A10 team back in the day.
So we go to Texas A&M, Penn State. Again, Penn State, I have them down as no business being in the tournament. Micah Shrewsbury is the coach. They're talking about him moving to Notre Dame. I'm not sure I really understand all of that, but they are in the tournament. I don't think they have any business being in a tournament, and they're up against a really tough Buzz Williams team, Texas A&M. He's one of my sleeper coaches in the country. He was at Virginia Tech. He did an amazing job. Now he's at Texas A&M, and they're a tough out every single time. They're athletic. They defend, and he does a great job on the offensive side of the ball, so I'm going to take Texas A&M there. And then we get down to Texas and Colgate, my former employer. Colgate, Matt Langle, great coach, 4 times now. I think he's ready for a step up. We'll talk about him if we get a chance in our coaching segment. But also I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him at Colgate moving forward. But again, we're going with Texas. And I think Texas, personally, I think they should have removed the interim tag from Rodney Terry. He's done a tremendous job. The fact that they haven't removed the interim tag from Rodney Terry says to me that they have some big names that they're going to look at when this thing all settles down in terms of getting their next coach. Kansas and Howard University, Kenny Blakeney, former Duke player. I loved him as a player at Duke, great guy. My former benchmate, Rod Balanis, is at Howard, having come over from Notre Dame, and has added a great plus there. And I'm not sure what some of these athletic directors are looking at, but Rob Balanis would be a really good person to look at some of these jobs. He's got Patriot League experience, been at Notre Dame for many years, and is a really, really overall great guy. And so as we move on here, now we've got to go into Kansas and Howard, but sorry, Hot Rod, we're taking Kansas. Norm Roberts may be coaching the team, as Bill Self is rumored to be out today and maybe be out further. There hasn't been a lot of information about what's wrong with Coach Self, but my good friend, former freshman coach at Malloy, Norm Roberts, is in charge of the team, and they're in good hands. Norm was the St. John's coach for many years, did a great job in the tournament with them, and I think they're in good hands moving forward, and we wish Coach Self the best of luck getting back to us healthy. And now we go into Arkansas, Illinois. I like Arkansas there. They're very athletic. Illinois has some good players, but I'm going to stick there. VCU, St. Mary's. I'm going to go with St. Mary's out of Moraga in California. It's a beautiful campus. UConn, Iona. We got UConn, Iona here. This is a great game because I think UConn's a very good team. excuse me. I think Aaron Jackson is a very, very high-level NBA draft pick. They have the big guys inside. They have two big guys inside. I think they're terrific. But boy, that really hurts when you get stuck up against the king, Rick Pitino. And there's rumors about Coach Pitino moving after his time at Iona is done here. I'm not sure about all of that, but I know that right now that UConn's going to have their hands full with Iona because he's a great coach, and they have a pretty good team at Iona. I think they're athletic enough to stay with UConn, but I think UConn makes it through the game. Now we go to TCU, Arizona State. I like Arizona State. Bobby Hurley's doing a good job with his team. His dad was a guy that I loved back from Jersey City. He's one of the toughest men I've ever met in the college basketball ranks. And I think Coach, him and his brother are somewhat in that same bracket. That could be really interesting if they somehow get matched up against each other. I don't foresee that because Gonzaga's in this bracket. I think Gonzaga's really good, and they're going to be able to move forward. Northwestern and Boise State. I'm taking Boise State there. And one of the reasons is Northwestern's one of our Eat the Cannoli teams. They had a bunch of home games. They did very well, and I believe they deserve to be in the tournament and deserve where they are. But I'm going to take Boise State because they're usually pretty good. And then you have one of the teams I think that's a real good pick to make the Final Four. I think maybe we'll see how it forms out, but that's UCLA. So we could keep rolling here, and that way we go back to the South bracket, where we get some great games now.
Well, do you want to tease them and go? Because we're 45 minutes in, believe it or not.
We're almost done.
All right.
So why don't we let this roll right here, and then we'll pick it up next week.
All right.
We can do that if you'd like.
Well, how do you want to play this? You want to talk about NIT a little bit, or?
I want to talk about the NIT just briefly right now because there's a couple of teams that got absolutely bounced out of the NIT. They were in the NIT and then they went out. Washington State, big team out of the West Coast. They got knocked out by Eastern Washington. I didn't even know Eastern Washington was a Division I team. Villanova's missing Jay Wright a lot. 17 and 16. I'm not sure how they got into the NIT. Bounced out against Liberty. Richie McKay, good coach, does a great job. Rutgers, 19 and 14. I guess so. NIT. Maybe people were talking about them for the NCAA, but I looked at their number of home games and I really didn't see it. They got beat by Speedy Claxton and Hofstra, and St. John's is talking about Speedy Claxton as one of their.
In overtime, wow.
Yeah, in overtime, and St. John's is talking about Speedy Claxton as a great young coach as well as possibly on their short list. And then you have Seton Hall, not that big of an upset, but they lost to Colorado, and they got bounced out right away. So I think that's, the interesting part about the coaching pieces. Now we're going to go into where we have, the leave the cannoli thing is where we have 18 home games, 19 home games, 20 home games, and you're out for 10. And you're on the road for 10. That's a huge disparity. When you look at Iona, I think they're 12 and 12. When you look at UMass, similar. St. Bonaventure, all the mid-major schools are 14 and 12, 13 and 14 on their home and away games. And that's what really matters. If you can stay at home and have a home crowd and the referees are in there feeling good about everything, that's a huge advantage. And if you're bringing in teams that you have a huge advantage over, that's another huge advantage. So I'd like to talk about that again next week. We'll see how it all airs out, and we'll see if Cinderella emerges. But we can leave that right here, and we can talk about that next week and pick it up because I think we'll be timely enough to pick it back up and be right there.
Yeah, I think they'll be in the round of 16 by then. They'll be in the middle of the round of 16 by next week?
We should be. If we have a few minutes at the end, we'll run through them.
All right.
Okay? But before we go, I wanted to talk about an all-star team that I know here in Westfield that I love personally, and that's the crew down at Emma's. It's my favorite restaurant in town.
We've had the chef on there. Chef is on one of our shows.
I absolutely love Emma's. They have an all-star cast. They have John Paul. They have Donna. They have Emma. They have Lauren. They have the best waitresses that I've seen in a long time. We have Gwen, Nessa, Bailey, Kristen. I'm sure I'm leaving some people out. Rockin' Robin, but that's an all-star squad. I love Emma's. Anybody around who's been there know they do a great job. Okay, so let's keep moving on. I want to go into the coaching carousel if we can, Pete.
Okay.
Because that's what's really popping these days, and there are a number of marquee jobs open, and a number of different places where I think that we can now make some suggestions to the athletic director, make some suggestions to the booster club about how to go about their business a little differently. And one of the reasons that we talk about this is because right now on what we call the carousel, there's probably 30 Division I jobs open. Right now, out of 300. That's 10% of the entire population is being let go of their job. Now, what happens also is some of the other people will now come on and they will leave their job to go take another job. And so that's going to create another opening at the same time.
A second level of
another whole level. And so you could wind up with 50 jobs being open this year. And some of the jobs that are open right now are absolutely big jobs. And that will create synergy. That will create the carousel to spin. Because if you bring in somebody to take the Notre Dame job who was at a lower level school, now that lower level school has to fill it.
Right.
The one thing that we talked about last week that really slows the carousel down are retreads. And retreads are guys who've been around for a really, really long time. We'll give you a quick example of a retread hire that just occurred. You had the guy, Coach Beard, out of Texas, was let go in the middle of the season for some off-court stuff that happened, and he was let go of his job. Ole Miss has just signed Coach Beard and taken him into the ranks of the coaching Division I ranks again, having been out a short 2 or 3 months. And again, that's a retread. Is that a good hire? I think it probably is for Ole Miss, but again, we're looking for the young coaches to come up in the ranks and some of those other places where we're going to fill in, create opportunities for young guys to get up through the ranks, because I think that that's better for the game as well, too. I don't think it helps anybody to take some coach who's been around for a million years, has had 5 or 6 different shots at it, and give him another shot, as opposed to going to a young coach who's been working it and getting after it and has done well recruiting, done well with his scouting, and now is ready to take a chance. And I think we talked about a little bit last week about the levels. And so if you're looking at Notre Dame, you're looking at that level of basketball. That's the highest level of Division I basketball you have. And in that vein, I think it's very, very implausible that some of those schools would hire people that have never coached before as a head coach. So to take an assistant coach or somebody else into those jobs, I think that's really, really difficult. We've seen a lot of that recently at North Carolina, at Duke. Those are the best jobs in the country, and they're having difficulty there now a little bit, I think, especially in some of their decision-making processes with North Carolina not allowing the team to go into the NIT. That was a terrible decision in my opinion. But it also goes down to now it's going to have recruiting impact, it's going to have impact on those programs, and that's when things start to get bad, and that's when things start to go the other way.
But does that blunt it with the NIL? Like they could just recruit people with sneaker deals and stuff like that and bring them in that way? Almost like pulling up a free agent in pro
That's
sports.
a great question, and I think
time
will tell that, because Pittsburgh basically reloaded their whole team this year with NIL and made it to the NCAA tournament.
Right.
And you've heard some other coaches allude to the fact that people bought their teams, and just recently, loaded up their team, and now they're successful because they just bought them. So I think that what really, for me, interests me as a coach in that whole paradigm is, does that work? Is that reload going to work where you don't build up team chemistry? You constantly have new pieces moving in and out. Some guys are getting paid one amount, other guys are getting paid another amount, and other guys in that locker room are not getting paid at all. So that's really quite a dance for a coach, I think. So to me, it would behoove most of the coaches to keep building their program with integrity, keep building their program the way that they always have, and not jump into the portal, not jump into the NIL. But if you don't jump into the NIL, one of the reasons Patrick Ewing just lost his job, in my opinion, is because Georgetown didn't participate in the NIL. Georgetown doesn't have NIL deals. Now they're saying now we're going to start to move that way, but originally the school said as a university, we don't want to participate in that. You don't have to participate in it, but if you don't, it's going to have a really bad impact on your recruiting.
Right.
Because $400,000 to $0 isn't that hard to figure out for a person who needs money.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Was this Carolina move a brilliant move, saying we're not going to play ball. We're going to take our ball and go home, which is what they did. And in the meantime, they can try to recruit, hey, you want to come here next year? Bring your NIL deal, or we have a deal with Nike or Adidas or whatever, and you come to our school, we're going to make that run next year.
There will be other people recruiting against North Carolina as well, and they'll bring up the fact that they didn't play in this. They'll bring up the fact that they didn't allow their young men to go out, seniors now who are going to end their career, didn't have a chance to go out as NIT champions. They're going to bring that up against them. It's absolutely going to be brought up against them. But the bottom line is you have a coach who's a young coach, and you say, I want to get all the repetitions I can. I want to get all the work in that I can as a young coach to improve myself so I can get better.
Yep.
I think that that's part of it as well, too. But with your boosters and all of the people that would have been excited to go to that game, I think you really let them down. And I think that
I mean, I tend to agree with you. I just
answered by the NCAA or the NIT. That
Right.
requires an answer of some sort. I don't know what the answer is, because you can't ban them from going to the NIT because they didn't want to go in the first place.
right, and you can't compel them to go either.
Right. And so now we go into Noxzema a little bit, all right, with the coaching stuff. Who do we put the Noxzema on? Who are the guys that we want to say, wow, this guy deserves he's a fresh face and he deserves a good shot? So we're talking about Notre Dame. I got 3 names for you at Notre Dame. I like Matt Langle at Notre Dame from Colgate. I think it's a big jump, but I like that. I like that jump, and I think he's a very, very intelligent young man. I think he's ready to make that jump. I think Dusty May is another name that they should look at. He's an IU graduate. He's done terrific. See how his team does in the tournament. But I think he's done very well. And Pat Kelsey, I know some people at UMass are going to hear that name and not be too excited about it, because Coach Kelsey was the man who took the UMass job and then turned around and left UMass to leave them with Coach McCall. I think that they would probably have some stipulation about that call of mine, but I think Coach Kelsey's done an amazing job and really should be good. When you look at the Texas job, that is a marquee job in this country, one of the best jobs in the country for sure, in terms of resources, in terms of conference, in terms of having the access to private jets to come home from. Just about everything in the Texas job is a really, really good job. That's what makes me think they're going to look for marquee names. I would not be surprised to see John Calipari in that search at some point. But I think that they have a really, really good selection of names that they can choose. But I would not be surprised to see that happen. If that does happen, it opens up the Kentucky job, which makes that exciting as well, too, because then the carousel just keeps moving a little bit and we keep going. The Georgetown job is open. Patrick Ewing, one of their great players, I thought, had a little bit of a tough deal there. I liked him as the head coach at Georgetown. He's one of their former players, a great, great NBA player as well, so that has that cachet. He was also an assistant coach in the NBA, so players that are coming into college all like to hear about that NBA stuff. What are your NBA connections? Who do you know in the NBA? How can you help me get to that next level?
Yep.
And I think for that regard, Patrick Ewing was terrific there. But if you're not going to get in the NIL deal, Georgetown, you're going to lose. And if you're not going to get into the portal, you're probably going to lose as well. I think it'd be wise if we knock all this stuff off, but until they do, you're going to have to participate in it a little bit.
Got to play the game, yeah.
Got to play the game while it's going on.
Yep.
All right, I got a couple of names for you on that one, and these are easy ones, okay? Tommy Amaker, he's the head coach at Harvard. Duke graduate, has had numerous titles at the Ivy League level with Harvard. Coached at Seton Hall for a while as well, but I think he's a fine, fine young coach that could really, really do a great job getting bumped up to the next level, especially at Georgetown. His Duke pedigree, and I'm not sure if he was on the national championship team, but he was maybe the best on-ball defender that I've seen in college basketball in a long time, Tommy Amaker. And if you go to Yale and you look at Coach Jones, I know Vicky Chun, the AD down there, is not going to like me talking about her head coach because she'd have to fill in the gap if he was to leave. But this is another guy who's done a great job at Yale. He has absolutely blown the paradigm out at Yale in terms of where they were and where they could be. And so those are two really good choices for Georgetown. I would say that they should be talking to them. I think Ed Cooley's a little bit of a wish list for them. Quite possibly he's had a good run at Providence and wants to step up to Georgetown. I don't know how much of a difference that makes financially or how much of a difference that makes in terms of program prestige. I think he's got to roll in at Providence, and if he wants to get out, he can probably get out and get a better job than Georgetown. The last one I'd throw in there is Coach Jones's brother at Boston University. Done a great job up at Boston University. He is an absolute great technician. Colgate's taken over the Patriot League right now, but he's been in second place a bunch of times. He's also won the league and been in the NCAA tournament. I think they got knocked out of the NCAA tournament when the COVID hit. They actually won the league and didn't get to participate. And so I think he's a fine, fine coach and an absolute gentleman. And Georgetown, Georgetown will be lucky to get him. St. John's has an opening right now, and all you hear in New York, my hometown, is Rick Pitino is going to go to St. John's, and that's going to leave Iona open. But from what I understand, Coach Pitino has a fairly significant buyout on his contract at Iona. Some of the contracts that these young men sign, or older men sign, are contracts which have buyouts on them. And if you get to a big school, $10 million can be a buyout. $1 million can be a buyout. Somebody has to pick up the million. Somebody has to pick up. In this case, with Coach Pitino, I could be wrong, but somebody told me it was in excess of $5 or $10 million on a buyout. And so does St. John's want to pick up that number and do that?
Can they afford to pick up that number?
They talked about Speedy Claxton. St. John's can afford to do it.
Okay.
St. John's can afford to do it. Any of those big conferences in the Big East or any of them can afford to do it. Do they want to do it is another thing. And from what I've heard is that the external people at St. John's, the boosters and the other people, are very excited about Coach Pitino. I'm not so sure about some of the internal people that are involved there because of some of the different stuff that's happened in his past. I think St. John's, I'm going to go out on a limb here because this guy's one of my favorites, and he's a former player of mine. And he was my first recruit at Westfield State. He went to George Mason with Jim Larinaga, went to Miami with Coach Larinaga. They went to the Final Four at George Mason. They were in the Elite Eight at Miami, and now he's the head coach at George Washington. He's only been there for a year, but he's a Malloy kid that's right down the street from St. John's. He grew up in Queens, and I watched him coach this year. He's going to have a very bright future, and I think I'm just going to throw him out there because he's my personal favorite, but I think St. John's could talk to Chris Caputo. I think St. John's could call George Washington and give Chris Caputo a call. Obviously, he's my guy, and I have a bit of a lean there, but I'm going to go right out and say that. But he's Westfield State graduate, and he's the head coach at GW this year. They had great wins over Dayton and some of the other teams in their conference, and I think St. John's could do a lot worse. I think they'd do a great job if they went down and at least had a conversation with Coach Caputo. I think that he fits the mold. He grew up in the Catholic school mold. He's a Queens young man. He's got a great job right now, but I think that it would be an interesting conversation to have. And again, obviously, he's my guy, and I want to pump him up and do the best. But I think that he's going to do well at George Washington, and I think he's going to make some move from there. And so St. John's, right now, why not have a conversation? Why not take a look?
All right, and so where did that hour go?
This is the absolute fastest hour in college basketball.
Yes, it is.
We're hot. We're hot,
yes,
Pete.
It is.
And I'll tell you, what happens when you combine Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt?
Oh, jeez.
You get in the zone.
Yeah.
You get in the zone, Pete.
Yep. Absolutely.
Thank you for another great week. I hope we did well. We appreciate your feedback, and we will now, within the next week, we'll have Instagram, we'll have Facebook, we'll have Twitter, we'll have all these different places for you to communicate with us, to provide us some feedback on the show, and to give us some direction as well as where you'd like to see us go. But again, we are going to close this hour. I can't believe that it's an hour already.
Yeah.
And I want to thank MV Pete for being with me for the ride. I think we got a lot going on right now, and we're going to be able to crash this thing next week because it's going to be in full swing. The NCAA tournament's going to be on. The coaching carousel is going to be on. And we're going to actually in a couple of weeks, we're going to do our own mock draft here in the NBA draft. So we're going to do that as well, just like we did the selections today. We'll get back to you next week with some of our other picks as we move forward, and we'll keep it fluid. I hope everybody has a great, great week. And one thing we want to do in the zone here is we just want to get to people and get to people in terms of saying, hey, when you see other people out there and you see them out there on the street and you don't have any idea what's going on in their life, you don't have any idea what's going on inside their head, trust me, it ain't probably that great. Everybody's got something going on in their life that's tough, that's rough, and they got a little bit of distance that they're trying to create here between themselves and reality. And so I think it behooves us if we get to be in a place where we just walk by people and talk to total strangers and just say hello. Just walk by. I grew up in New York City, and that would be an absolutely crazy thing to do. But I think in Westfield, we could start something really cool about that. Just walk down the street and say hello to somebody. Just walk out, and maybe you'll improve their day. Smile at them. It doesn't have to have any conditions to it. Just walk down the street and be nice to people. I think that'll change everything we got going on here. But that's just a little bit of a tip from the old coach who wants to see this team play real well. You guys have a great week. We'll see you next week.